The frost had come down out of the hills in the night and turned the last mile of the wind-hollow road to iron. Eloan came up it on foot. The carrier's cart had stuck fast at the foot of the hill, the pony refusing the ice, and rather than sit and freeze, she had walked the rest with only the bag that held her physic. She heard the trouble before she saw the house. It was a thin, tearing sound, the kind that a throat makes when it has stopped being able to draw air, and it came from somewhere past the black gate, and it went into her like a splinter. She began to run. The gate gave onto a stable court, white with rime, full of people standing still. That was the first thing she understood. Running in, a dozen grown people standing quite still around something on the ground, doing nothing at all. A boy lay in the straw at the center of them, 6 years old perhaps, his lips gone the color of a plum, his small chest heaving and catching and heaving and taking in nothing. A stout woman in an apron was on her knees with her hands pressed to her own mouth. A man in a good black coat stood over the child with a lancet already open in his hand. "There is nothing further to be done," the man in black was saying in the smooth, carrying voice of someone used to being the last word. "The membrane has closed the windpipe. I have bled him once already. You had best send to the church, Mrs. Quill. It is beyond my art now." On the steps above the court stood a tall man in a gray greatcoat, bareheaded in the cold, and he did not move either. He watched the child strangle with a face like a shut door. No, the word was out of Eloan before she had decided anything. She was already across the court, already on her knees in the frozen straw, already turning the boy onto his side with the flat authority of hands that had done this before. "Give me room, all of you. Back. You," this to the man with the lancet, without looking up at him. "Put that away. You will not open a vein in a child who has no air. You will only frighten what heart he has left." "Madam," said the man in black, "I am the physician of this house. Then physic him." She had her ear at the boy's blue mouth, her fingers already at the corner of his jaw. "Croup, gone to the false membrane. He is not dead. He is drowning in the dry, which is a slower thing and a kinder one to cheat." She reached into the bag at her hip and brought out, of all the small, ordinary objects in the world, a horn spoon. It had been her mother's, worn thin as a shilling from 20 years of measuring physic into frightened mouths, and it was the one thing of hers. Eloan had never, in all her running, thought to sell. She scraped a bare edge of gray powder from a twist of paper lobelia, and a little of the burnt alum her mother had sworn by, laid it far back on the child's tongue with the worn horn, and then she did the thing the physician had not thought to do, because it was a servant's thing and not a scholar's. She swept 2 fingers deep into the small throat, found the loosened false skin the fever had grown there, and drew it out whole. The boy pulled in one long, whooping, terrible breath, and then another. And then he began gloriously to cry. Nobody spoke for the length of that crying. The cook crawled to gather him up. Eloan sat back on her heels, her skirts soaked through with melt and blood, her mother's spoon still in her fist, and looked at no one. She had learned long ago that after you do a frightening thing in front of frightened people, the wise course is to make yourself small at once, before they remember to be afraid of you instead. She looked up only when a shadow fell over her. The man in the gray greatcoat had come down the steps. Younger than the coat and the stillness had made him, 30 perhaps. Dark hair, frost damp at the temples, eyes of so cold a gray they seemed to hold no color at all. A handsome face, and a shut one. He looked at her with a still measuring displeasure, as if she were one more thing in a life gone quietly wrong. "You are the woman my grandmother sent for," he said. It was not a question. She got to her feet, which was absurd in that ruin of a court, and dropped him a curtsy which was more absurd, and did it anyway. "Eloan Rill, your grace, the Dowager Duchess engaged me as her companion. My coach could not take the hill." He did not look at the child who was alive and roaring in his cook's arms not 4 feet away. He looked at Eloan's bloodied hands, her soaked hem, the gray powder still on her fingers. "Dr. Crail attends the health of this house," he said, not its companions. He turned to the physician who had closed his lancet and arranged his soft face into patience. "Crail, see the boy does not take a fever." And then to the tall, spare butler who had appeared at his shoulder as butlers do, without seeming to have crossed the ground between Alderton. "The south rooms are all shut for the season. Put Miss Rill in the north wing." Something moved through the court at that, not a sound, but a stillness deepening, a held breath. Even the physician's smooth patience flickered. "Your Grace," said the butler very low, "the north wing has not been opened in 2 years. There is no fire late, the chimneys will not have been swept. It will be—" He hunted for a word a servant might use to a duke. "Very cold, sir." "She has just told us she walked a mile of ice for the pleasure of the position," the duke said. He was already turning for the house. "A cold room will not trouble a woman who does not feel the cold." At the foot of his own steps he paused, and looked back once across the white court at the small, drenched, unremarkable figure standing there, with a horn spoon in her fist, and he said it to his butler in a voice not lowered nearly enough. "She won't last a fortnight in Rhymfell. They never do." And he went in. Alderton did not answer his master, but he stood a moment longer than he needed to in the bitter court, watching the cook rock a boy who by every rule of the house ought to have been carried in stiff and covered by now, and thought that in 40 years at Windhollow he had never seen anything come warm and living out of that north wing. Then he went himself for bedding and a scuttle of coal, for he would sooner be turned off himself than send even a doomed woman into Rhymfell with nothing to burn. Asterisk, asterisk. Elowen had come to Windhollow to disappear, and a place no one would enter was, she told herself that first freezing night. She had told the Dowager Duchess, in the careful letters that had won her the post, only the half of her life that was safe to tell. She had said she was a gentleman's daughter, orphaned, without fortune, obliged to earn her bread. Every word of it was true. She had not said the rest. She had not said that her father had been the finest surgeon apothecary in the whole of the West Country, nor that she had stood at his elbow from the age of 10 and learned at it more medicine than half the lettered men who now wrote doctor before their names. She had not said that when he died she had gone, for want of anything better, into the household of Sir Marcus Fenwick to nurse his failing mother. Nor how that had ended. The old lady had died. Old ladies did. But she had died the very week a diamond drop went missing from her own dressing table, and the physician who might have said plainly that her heart had simply stopped was Sir Marcus's own man, and said instead smoothly that there had been something amiss in her last draught. And so it had become, in the space of a single black month, a thing everyone at Fenwick understood without anyone quite saying it, that the surgeon's daughter had hastened an old woman to her grave and helped herself to a jewel on the way out. There was talk of the assizes. There was, she had heard later, a reward printed. She had left Fenwick End on a wet night with the clothes she stood in, her mother's horn spoon, and her true name, Elowen Vasey, folded away out of sight like a letter one dares not burn and dares not send. Rill. She had chosen because it meant a small, quiet stream, the kind that runs under a hedge and troubles nobody, and that was all she wished on this earth to be. If she were found, if she were named, if some traveler carried the word Vasey up this frozen valley, there would be no fortune to bargain with, and no father to shield her, only a rope, or the next thing to it. She had reasoned it all out on the road north, a companion who sat quiet in a warm parlor 4 hours a day, and troubled no one would never be looked at twice. She would be a rill under a hedge, for a year, for 2, for as long as it took the world to forget there had ever been a surgeon's daughter worth hanging. She had sworn to herself, walking up that iron road not 3 hours since, to keep her head down and her clever hands still. She looked now at those hands, gray with a dead child's medicine, and stiffening with cold in a room where her own breath hung visible on the air. And she understood that she had broken both vows inside her first hour, in front of the entire staff and the master of the house. and that a boy 3 doors down was breathing tonight because of it. Asterisk. Asterisk. It took Ilowen less than a week to see that the boy in the straw had been no accident of a hard winter. He had only been the loudest symptom of a house that was quietly, expensively dying from the inside, and doing it so slowly that no one under its roof had yet said the word aloud. It was a beautiful house. That was the pity of it, long and low and honey-colored under its cap of snow. A house that seemed to have grown up out of the valley rather than been set down upon it, with 200 years of good sense in its bones. And the good sense was going to the bad, the way a strong man goes to the bad, from the middle outward, while everyone about him keeps saying how well he looks. The silver was going black in the drawers. Whole staterooms stood shuttered and sheeted and smelled of damp, which meant a roof was open somewhere and had been for a season, and no one had climbed to see. Half the maids' places stood empty and unfilled, and over all of it, mild and pink and everywhere, at once, moved Dr. Crail, for Ilowen learned very quickly that the physician of Windhollow was a great deal more than a physician. It was Crail who ordered the household's comforts, and Crail who settled with the tradesmen, and Crail who held, on a ring at his own belt, the keys to the still room and the cellar and the locked cabinet of the master's own medicines. "Dr. Crail sees to all that now," said Mrs. Quill, the cook, wiping her red hands, when Ilowen asked why good beef came green to a great kitchen and could not be sent back, since her grace died. "There's no Mistress C, and his grace won't be troubled, so it's Dr. Crail settles it, and Dr. Crail's not to be told his business by a cook. She said it the way people say a thing they have stopped letting themselves think about. Her grace." Ilowen learned that story in pieces, from Tamsin the housemaid, and old Thorne the gardener, and the very shape of the shut-up house. The young Duchess Amabel she had died 2 winters gone, in the north wing, of a childbed fever that took the child with her. The Duke had walked out of that wing on the morning she died, and had never once gone back into it, nor spoken her name, nor looked at a single thing in the whole estate that had been hers to keep, which was very nearly everything. He had shut the north wing like a coffin, and let one smiling man pick up every key he dropped. The staff called the wing Rhymfell now, for the frost that furred its inside of the windows, and they crossed themselves going past its door and into it as a slight or an economy or simple indifference. The Duke had put the woman who saved the cook's grandson. Ilowen should have been glad of it. A wing no one would enter was the safest hiding place a hunted woman could ask for. She lit her small coals and kept her head down and told herself the ruin of this house was no affair of hers. She very nearly believed it. Then, in her second week, she was sent up to the library at noon with the Dowager's book, and she passed the Duke coming down, and she saw his hand on the banister. It was not steady. His eyes, when they crossed hers, were slow to fix, the pupils gone to pinpricks in that cold gray, and there was a sweetness on his breath she knew, a poppy sweetness, the smell of a draught given not to heal but to keep a man soft and still and asleep on his feet. She had measured too many doses in her father's shop not to know it in an instant. The Duke of Windhollow was not merely a man drowning in grief. Someone in this house was holding his head under. Asterisk, asterisk. Ilowen's whole employment, on paper, was to sit 4 hours a day with an old woman, and the old woman was the one person at Windhollow who frightened her. The Dowager Duchess of Windhollow was named Odelin, and she was 81, and she kept the only genuinely warm room in the house, a small south parlor with a fire she would not let go out, and a shawl the color of wood ash, and a back as straight as the poker beside her. Her hands had gone to knots, her eyes had gone nowhere at all. On Ilowen's first afternoon she looked her up and down for the better part of a minute, the way a buyer looks at a horse she suspects of being sound and cheap at once, and then she said, "You are not what I sent for." "I am sorry to disappoint your grace." "I did not say disappointed. I said not what I sent for, which is a wholly different article. And if you mean to live in this world, you had better learn to tell the two apart. She tapped the arm of her chair with one knotted finger. "Sit there, where the light is on your face. Not there. My grandson tells me you put your hand down a dying child's throat in the stable court on your first hour, over the head of my own physician, and pulled the boy back from the very sill of the churchyard." "The boy was not as far gone as Dr. Crail believed, ma'am." "Dr. Crail," said the dowager, with a dryness that could have struck a light, "believes a great many comfortable things." She studied Alowan a while, and something older and colder than sharpness moved for a moment behind her eyes. "That child is Mrs. Quill's grandson. He is the first thing to come out of a sickbed alive in this house in 2 winters. Do you know what died in the north wing 2 winters ago, Miss Rill?" "Her Grace the young Duchess, ma'am." "I was told. I am very sorry. Everyone is very sorry. It is the emptiest phrase in the whole of the English tongue, and I forbid you to use it in this room again." The old woman looked into her fire. "Amabel kept this house. My grandson never had a mother worth the name, and I am too old to climb stairs. So it was Amabel who held the keys and turned them, Amabel who kept the whole place breathing. And then one April she was too warm at dinner, and by the next Sunday she was under the floor of Windhollow Church, and the child with her. And my grandson walked out of that wing and shut the door on it, and has been signing whatever is put under his hand ever since, sooner than open a single drawer that was hers." She turned her head, and the pale eyes fixed Elowen like 2 pins. "You have been here 11 days. I am not blind, and I am not tactful, and I have no time left to be either. Tell me what you have seen, and do not spare me." So Elowen told her. She had not meant to. But there is a particular relief in being asked a true question by someone who plainly wants the true answer, and she had been holding it 11 days. She told her of the green beef and the black silver and the shut rooms breathing damp, of the maids' places standing empty, of a still room and a wine cellar and a locked case of the master's own medicines all hanging on one soft pink man's belt. She did not yet say the last thing. The poppy sweetness on the Duke's breath, the pin-pricked eyes at noon. She had learned young that a half-spoken suspicion is a gift to your enemy and a noose for yourself. The dowager heard her out without moving. "My grandson," she said at last, "is not a fool. He is a grieving man, which wears the same coat but is a different creature underneath. He has let one man hold everything because he cannot bear to touch anything himself." Her knotted hands folded. "You know something of medicine. More than a companion has any business knowing." "A little, ma'am. Do not be modest. I loathe modesty above all the counterfeit virtues." She held Elowen's eye. "I am going to make you useful, not as a companion. A companion is a stick of parlor furniture, and I have worn out 3 of them in 2 years. I give you the still room, the servants' sick list, and the ordering of their physic, on my authority, which in this house is a good deal older than Dr. Crail's." She let that settle, then added with relish, "He will not thank me for it, mind. Crail has had the running of my grandson's health and my grandson's house and my grandson's purse for 2 years, and a man grown fat in the dark does not bless the hand that opens a shutter. You will make an enemy of him inside a month. See that you have made friends of everyone else in this house first, and I give you that frozen tomb my grandson has lodged you in." A gleam came into the old face, thin and wicked and delighted. "He told his butler you would not last a fortnight in Rhymfell. He said it where I could hear, which was careless of him. So here is my commission to you, Miss Rill. You have until the thaw. Make the coldest room in my house the one place in it worth being, and we shall see which of you was the fool." Elowen took the commission, the only way she trusted, which was quietly and with her sleeves rolled, and she began, of all the ruined things in that house, with the cold wing she had been sent to die in. She did not scold and she did not command, and she never once, in all that followed, reminded a soul that the dowager had given her leave. She had never in her life won anything by argument, She meant to win this the one way she believed in, by making herself, without fuss and one small task at a time, entirely impossible to do without. So she began with the chimney. The great flue of the north wing had not been swept in 2 years, and a jackdaw had built in it besides, and it cost her 9 pence of her own, and half a day's coaxing to get old Thorn and the boy up onto the frozen roof to clear it. When it was clear, she laid the first fire that had burned in Rhymefell since the young Duchess died, and she sat before it that night, wrapped in Alderton's spare blankets, and watched 2 years of frost weep slowly off the inside of the windows and run down the black glass like the house itself, remembering how to cry. In the morning the room smelled of wood smoke instead of the tomb. It was a beginning. The house did not believe in her, and it said so in the way of houses below stairs, and just out of her hearing. There was a wager in the servants' hall by the end of her first week, and it was reckoned a fair one. A shilling, said the little companion, would be carried out of Rhymefell with an ague before Lady Day, packed off like the 3 companions before her. Even Tamsin, who liked her, had laid her 6 pence quietly on the frost. Eloan knew of the wager within 3 days, because a woman who has spent her whole life being invisible hears a great deal that louder people miss, and she did not resent it in the least. She thought it, on the whole, a sensible bet. She had made much the same one on herself the night she came north, with 15 shillings and a horn-spoon. She only meant to win it, and not by argument, for she had never in her life won anything by argument, but by being, quietly and one small task at a time, impossible to do without. Then she turned to the still room, because a still room is the honest heart of a house laid bare. You cannot hide the state of a family in the state of its physic. She scoured it out. She threw away 2 years of cordials gone to vinegar and simples gone to dust, and at the very back of the highest shelf she found a row of little pots in a neat round girlish hand, rose conserve, elderflower, syrup for a winter cough, each one signed with a small A in the corner, all of them untouched since the April the writing stopped. Amabel's own. Eloan washed each pot clean, and kept every label. It seemed to her a small and wicked thing to throw away the handwriting of the dead. And she began, quietly, to heal. She dosed Tamsin's chilblains, Quill's rheumatic knee, and the undergardener's whitlow. Not out of the master's costly locked cabinet, but out of her own hedgerow knowledge and a few pennies of honest herbs. And she did it better and quicker, and at a 40th of the price. When the second housemaid took a fever, Eloan did not send her shivering up to the attics to sweat it out alone. She carried her, blankets and all, down to the warm room in the north wing, and nursed her by the fire she had lit, and had her up and mending in 4 days. Word of that ran through the servants' hall the way warmth runs through a cold body, slowly, then all at once. Within a month, the frozen wing at the wrong end of the house had somehow become the place the maids brought their mending to sit near the fire, where Thorn came to thaw his hands after the frost, where Mrs. Quill carried her grandson of an evening so the boy could doze safe and warm on the settle. Eloan had dragged in from a shut room, Rhymefell, the servants had called it, and crossed themselves at the door. They stopped crossing themselves. They started. Without quite noticing they did it, calling it Miss Rill's wing. And because she had been raised in a shop where a farthing was a farthing, she began, without quite meaning anything by it, to keep a book, a small one, a nurse's book, what physic went to which sick bed, what the herbs had cost, what the apothecary in the market town charged at his own counter. She kept it only to be honest, as she had always kept such things. But a house is a single body, and if you lay 2 fingers on one vein, you can feel the whole heart laboring, and it was not a fortnight before her figures and the house's figures fell out of step. The apothecary at Nethercombe sold his best opium at a shilling the ounce, and showed her the price chalked on his own board. Yet when the quarter's physic was posted up, that same ounce stood on the estate's account at 5. Eloan looked a long while at the 2 numbers in the cold passage, and said nothing to anyone. She was very good at saying nothing. She had had years of practice at it. Dr. Crail, for his part, had begun to notice her too, and to relish it a good deal less than his master did. His fees had a way of shrinking now. The maids no longer brought him their coughs and their chilblains and their sixpences. They went to the warm wing, and the brown-haired woman who asked for nothing. He said nothing yet. He only smiled a little more than usual when they passed in a passage, and watched her with his soft pink patience, the way a man watches a candle. He has not quite decided whether to pinch out. The Duke of Windhollow noticed her the way one notices a change in the weather without meaning to. And all at once, he did not go to the still room or the servants' hall. Those were another country, to a duke. But he could not help observing that the great cold house was warmer down one passage than it had any right to be, that his coffee came hot now, that the boy who ought to have died was underfoot in a stable court, roaring and whole. He met her once by accident in the long gallery, the only way he met anyone that year, with a basket of drying herbs on her hip and a smudge of beeswax on her wrist, and she stood aside against the wall with her eyes down, as a servant should. He went past her. Then he stopped. "You are the woman with the boy," he said. "Yes, Your Grace." He looked at her, then properly looked, for the first time since the frozen court, now that she was dry and it was daylight. She was small and brown-haired and quiet, the sort of woman a ballroom looks straight through. Except that when she raised her eyes to answer him, they were level and clear and gray, and entirely without fear, and he had not been looked at like that by a living soul. In 2 years his servants looked at the floor. His grandmother looked straight through him. Dr. Crail looked at him the way a man looks at a purse. This one looked at him as though he were simply a man who had asked a question, and she had the answer, and was deciding how much of it he could bear. It unsettled him. He was not used to being seen. "You have made my house untidy with living," he said, which was not at all what he had meant to say. "I have made one wing of it warm, sir. The living came of its own accord. Warmth is only a door. Things walk through it." He had no answer to that, and disliked having none. "That is all," he said, and went on down the gallery, and did not understand why his own house felt for the length of a passage a little less like a place where something had died. Eloan watched him go, and thought, "There is a good man in there, and he is being kept asleep." And then she thought of the pin-pricked eyes and the poppy on his breath, and of the one locked cabinet in the whole house that her new authority did not reach, and she found she wanted very badly, and for reasons that had nothing to do with keeping her head down, to see what Dr. Crail kept inside it. When Dr. Crail was called 8 miles off to attend a lambing squire with the gout, and was not looked for before dark, the still room and the physic closet shared a wall and a door, and the door, which Crail kept locked as a matter of course, had been left on the latch by a man in a hurry to reach a wealthy patient's dinner. Eloan stood a long moment with her hand flat on the wood. She had spent her whole life learning not to open doors like this one. Then she thought of a boy blue in a straw, and of the Duke's hand shaking on the banister at noon, and she went in. The closet was cold and orderly, and smelled of camphor and poppy. On the shelf stood the master's own cordial in its blue bottles, a fortnight's worth ranged in a row, and beside them the physician's account book bound in brown calf. She opened the account book first, because a woman raised in a surgery reads a physic book the way a soldier reads ground. The figures did not agree with the house, and they did not agree with each other. Here was Turkey opium. Best, 4 ounces charged to the estate at a gentleman's price, quarter after quarter, when Eloan, who had watched her father buy it, knew to the penny what 4 ounces cost, and knew that no honest sick-room in England could burn through it at such a rate. Here were French cordials and Peruvian bark invoiced and paid for, and nowhere on any shelf. Here was money running quietly out of the house through the one door no grieving man would ever think to guard, his own medicine chest. She turned the leaves faster, and the same quiet river ran through every quarter. A case of tortoiseshell instruments, billed and never bought. A monthly nurse hired for the late Duchess's lying-in, a guinea a week for 8 weeks, when Eloan had already heard from Mrs. Time. Quill that no nurse had ever crossed the threshold, that Amabel had been tended by 2 frightened housemaids and by Crail alone. Small sums, each of them, the kind no sorrowing man ever counts. Set end to end across 2 years, they made a fortune, and every shilling had walked out of Windhollow through the one door its master could not bear to open, but it was the blue bottles that stopped her breath. She drew the stopper from the master's cordial and touched it to her tongue, once, the way her father had taught her, and she went cold in a way the February closet had nothing to do with. This was no soothing draught for a sorrowing man. The poppy in it was laid on treble strong. Dose after measured dose, week after week. Not enough to kill. Never enough to kill. Only exactly enough to keep a tall, clever man soft and slow and sleeping on his feet. His grief kept green and his will kept drowned, signing whatever was slid beneath his hand. She understood, standing in that cold and orderly closet, that she was not looking at a thief pocketing a few guineas of opium. She was looking at a man being quietly unmade, one careful blue bottle at a time, by the very hand paid to mend him. And then, turning a last leaf of the brown book, she found the entry from 2 Aprils gone, in the same neat hand, and read the doses that had been carried up to a young duchess burning with a childbed fever. And her stomach turned over, because she knew that physic, and she knew it was wrong, and she knew what it would have done to a woman already weak. She stood very still, with the book open in her 2 hands. Perhaps it had been only ignorance, a lazy man reaching for the poppy, because poppy was easy, quieting a fever he had not the skill to read until the woman beneath it slipped quietly away. Perhaps it had been worse. Iloan could not tell which, and told herself it did not signify, and knew in the same breath that it signified enormously. For a house that will not look at how its mistress died is a house that can be robbed forever by the man who carried up her last cup. That was the whole of it, laid open in brown ink. A grieving master kept soft on treble poppy so that he would sign and never read. A fortune bled out quarter by quarter in phantom nurses and instruments no hand had ever held, and holding the whole rotten weight of it up from underneath, one small April death that no soul under this roof had ever once been suffered to question. Down the passage, the outer door of the still room opened, and a soft, unhurried, pink-sounding tread came in out of the cold. Dr. Crail had come home early. Asterisk, asterisk, Iloan had time to do one thing, and she did the right one. She shut the brown book, set it corner to corner exactly as it had stood, and was on the still-room side of the door with a jar of dried chamomile in her 2 hands by the time Dr. Crail came in out of the cold. He was pink and unhurried and smiling, as he was always smiling. Miss Rill in my still-room. In the dowager still-room, Dr. Crail. She did not look up from the jar. Her Grace has given me the ordering of the servant's physic, and I am counting over what the winter has left us. There is no chamomile worth the name, and half the honey has gone to sugar. She said it in the flat, dull voice of a woman wholly taken up with small things, and let him look as long as he liked. He came a step nearer, soft-footed for so heavy a man, and let his eye travel past her to the closet door still ajar, and to the row of blue bottles on the shelf beyond it. Something moved behind the smile, not quite slowly enough. "You keep a great many keys these days," he said pleasantly. "For a companion, only the still rooms. The rest are yours." She set the jar down and met his eyes, then level and gray, and without any fear she would let him see, and she saw the thing. She had half hoped she would not. Under the pinkness, under all that patience, the man was afraid of her. He had come in smiling to frighten her, and it was his own fright that had carried him here because a quiet woman with a slate had been standing altogether too near his open door. He gathered himself and set the smile a notch wider. A ward between servants, then, one to another. Windhollow is a great house with a deal of dark in it, and a young woman with no people. He let the words hang gentle as a palm laid over a mouth, for you have no people, "Have you, Miss Rill? Does well to keep to her linen and her chamomile, and to ask no questions whose answers can do her no earthly good. Companions come to this house, they do not stay in it. I should be very sorry to see you carried out before your time." "How kind of you to trouble," said Eloan. "But I keep excellent accounts of the servant's health, Dr. Crail. It is the one thing I have ever done that no living soul has asked me to stop." She took up her slate. "Good evening to you." And she walked out past him with her chamomile and her slate unhurried, and her hands did not begin to shake until she was 3 turns up the cold stair with no one to see them. She did not go to the Duke. She thought about it for 3 nights running and did not go. And her reasons were good ones. And one of them was plain cowardice, and she knew it for what it was. To go to the Duke was to be looked at. To be looked at was to be asked her name and her people and her history. And behind her name stood a printed reward, and an old woman dead at Fenwick End, and a rope with her own slight weight already reckoned into it. A companion who made an enemy of the physician would be turned off with a bad character. A companion turned off with a bad character would be traced, and, once traced, once named aloud in a coaching inn, she was Eloan Vasey again, run to earth at the last. Better to keep her head down, then. Better to keep to her linen and her chamomile, and let a rich man's house go on poisoning its own master in good brown ink for 3 more years until she was safe and grown and gone from it. It was not her house. It was not her fight. She had troubles enough of her own to hang for. She very nearly believed it. Asterisk, asterisk. She believed it for exactly as long as it took the poppy to go up the stairs one more time. That evening she watched Alderton carry the little tray up to the master's rooms, the blue bottle, the single glass, as he had every evening for 2 years, his face wooden with the grief of a good servant doing a thing he has begun to hate and cannot name. And Eloan understood that she could no longer see that tray as a simple fact of the house. It had become, in 3 days, a thing being done to a living man in front of her, every night with her leave. The next afternoon the dowager, who missed nothing, watched Eloan fail entirely to attend to the book she was meant to be reading aloud, and said, without looking up from her own knotted hands, "You have found it out, then?" Eloan went still. "Found what out, your grace?" "Do not insult us both. You have the same face on you my Amabel had the week before she first tried to tell me and lost her nerve, and did not." The old woman's mouth went hard. "My grandson read 3 newspapers before his breakfast once, and quarreled with every leader in them, and knew the name of every tenant's child on the estate. He cannot follow a hand of cards now, nor tell you what hour it is. They call it his grief. I have buried a husband, a son and a daughter, Miss Rill. I know grief to the inch. Grief does not draw a man's eyes to pinholes at noon and send him to his bed at 8. She lifted her head, and for once there was no dryness in her at all, only a very old and very tired fury. "I have watched it for 2 years, and been able to prove nothing, because I am 81, and cannot get down my own stairs, and every account and every key and every blessed bottle in this house runs through that smiling man's hands. I could not save Amabel. I have not been able to save my grandson. I sent for a companion 4 times over, praying one of them would have eyes. 3 of them had none. The pale gaze pinned her. 'You have eyes. What will you do with them?' And there it was. Not a beggar at a gate, but an old woman's grief laid bare across a tea-table, and behind it a plain and unbearable sum. Eloan could keep her head down and stay safe, and in 3 years a good man would be sleeping still, or laid under the church floor beside his wife, and this fierce old woman would go into the ground knowing the whole of it and having been believed by no one. That was the cruelty of it. No villain was needed to keep the thing turning. It ran on the decency of the people caught in it, a cook's loyalty, a butler's obedience, an old woman's helplessness, a hunted girl's wish to save her own neck, and it would go on turning for exactly as long as everyone was too good or too frightened to be the one who spoke. "I cannot go to his grace, ma'am," Eloan said slowly, working it out as she spoke, Not with a suspicion. He is too far under to believe me. And Crail would have me turned off and named to the county within the week. I need two things. First, him awake enough to hear the truth, and a proof so plain a magistrate could not blink it away. The first I can begin tonight, if you will lend me your authority and hold your tongue. The second will take me the spring. The dowager looked at her a long moment, and something moved in the ancient face that might, in a younger woman, have been hope. What do you mean to do to my grandson? Stop poisoning him, said Eloan simply. Very carefully, and so slowly that the man who has been doing it does not notice I have taken his work away. That night she did the most dangerous thing she had done since she came north. She caught Alderton alone with the tray, told him not all of it, but enough, and watched 2 wooden years come apart in the good gray man's face at once. I carried it up, he said very low. Every night I carried it up to him. You carried up what you were given by the man paid to know better, she said. That is not the same sin, Mr. Alderton, and you will not have time to indulge it. I need you to carry up mine instead. And she took the blue bottle from his tray, and in the still room by one candle, emptied and rinsed and refilled it from a flask of her own, valerian and hop, and a little tincture to hold the color true enough to keep a tired man sleeping and not 1 grain of poppy in it. She measured the first honest dose with her mother's worn horn spoon, because it seemed right it should be that spoon, and set it back on the tray. Then she sent a man his life up the stairs on a little tray, and went to her cold, bright room to wait, and did not know, lying awake in it, whether she had just begun to save the Duke of Windhollow, or merely signed the warrant for her own discovery. A very short pause here. If you are enjoying this story, do subscribe so the next chapters find you. Now back to Windhollow. Asterisk, 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 the poppy let go of the Duke the way a long tide goes out slowly, and with a great deal of ugly ground uncovered before the clean sand showed underneath. The first week was the worst, and it frightened her. Though she had known it would come, a body 2 years accustomed to its nightly poppy does not thank you for taking it away. He sweated, his head split him. His temper, which had been a shut and silent thing, came alive and savage. He railed at the coffee and railed at the daylight, and once turned on Alderton, so savagely, for the drawing of a curtain that the old man came down gray. Eloan bore it, and coached the others to bear it, and adjusted her honest bottle a hair's breadth at a time, the way you bring a frozen limb back to warmth, slowly, so it does not die of its own thaw. Dr. Crail, called to his patient's sudden restlessness, frowned over the untouched blue bottles going up full and coming down empty, and could not make the account balance, and doubled the strength of what he mixed. Into bottles a quiet woman emptied every night into the still-room drain. And then in the second week of a wet and blowing March, the Duke of Windhollow woke up. He came down to breakfast one morning and read a newspaper. He read the whole of it. Eloan, carrying the dowager's chocolate through the hall, heard him say something short and dry to Alderton about a speech in it, and heard Alderton laugh. A sound, she was fairly sure, had not been made in that house in 2 years. By the week's end he had walked the length of his own east passage, and put his head, for the first time since April 2 years gone, into 3 of his own shut and sheeted rooms, and come out with a face like a man reading a letter he should have opened long ago. He found her as men in that house found everyone, by accident. She had taken to sitting an hour of an evening in the warm north wing after the others had gone up. Her own book, the fire she had lit burning low, the little kingdom she had made out of the coldest corner of his house, and one raw night he simply appeared in the doorway of it in his shirt-sleeves, holding a candle, looking about him at the mended settle and the herbs drying in bunches from the beam and the 2 years of frost long gone off the windows. "So this is where my house has been hiding," he said. "They told me the north wing was uninhabitable." "It was, your grace. It required inhabiting." He came in uninvited and ducal, and sat down on the settle where the cook's grandson dozed most evenings, and stayed an hour and said very little. And after that he came most evenings by no arrangement that either of them ever admitted to. It became without a word spoken to make it so, a country the two of them shared. The warm wing, at the wrong end of the house, the low fire, the wind outside. She found him to be exactly what his grandmother had promised under all that shut gray silence. Not cold, but wrecked. A man of dry, exact, unexpected humor, gone all to grief the way an orchard runs wild when there is no one left with the heart to prune it. He spoke of his wife. Only once. It was late, and the fire was down to embers, and he was turning an unlit pipe over in his hands, and he said, not looking at her, "She would have liked what you have done with this wing. She could not bear a shut room. She said a house was only as alive as its coldest corner, that anyone could keep a drawing room warm, and it took a real mistress to make people want to sit at the far cold end of the place." He was quiet. "I have not been able to come to this end of the house in 2 years. I could not have told you why. I think, perhaps, I could not bear how cold it had got." Eloan did not say she was sorry. She had been forbidden the word, and had come to think the dowager right about it. "It is not cold now," she said instead. "Come and warm your hands. You are letting the draft in from the passage, sitting there." Something moved at the corner of his mouth that was not quite a smile. The ghost of the man who had once quarreled with 3 newspapers before breakfast. He came and warmed his hands. After that, the wing was his too. He took to coming down of an evening in his shirt sleeves to sit on the settle among the drying herbs, and Tobin, Mrs. Quill's grandson, the boy from the stable court, loud and whole and wholly unafraid of dukes, would climb up beside him to show him a beetle in a matchbox or fall asleep against his arm, and the Duke of Windhollow, who had not held a warm thing in 2 years, let him. The maids grew used to finding their master at the wrong, cold end of his own house, curtsied a little less deeply each week, and began, without ever quite deciding to treat the north wing as the one room in the place where the light never went entirely out. What had been Rheinfeld, the frozen tomb they had once crossed themselves to pass, had become, by the lengthening days, the corner the whole household drifted to whenever the work would loose them. No one said aloud that it was Eloan's doing. They had no need to say it. You could hear it in the way they had started to say her name. And all the while, in the still room by one candle after he had gone up, she built her case the way she had once kept her father's shop, a farthing of proof at a time. She got the apothecary at Nethercombe to write out his true prices in his own hand, on the honest pretext of settling the servant's physic herself. She had Mrs. Guide. Quill set down plainly, and make her mark to it, that no monthly nurse had ever come to the young duchess's lying in. She copied every figure from Crail's posted accounts against the tradesman's own, and where the two met, they told the whole quiet story in daylight. She kept it all in a false bottom she had cut into her own workbox under the darning wool, where no maid would think to look and no physician would dare. Twice Crail near caught her at it, once on the cold stair with a candle in her hand, and each time she gave him nothing to hold, a still room to lock, a sick maid to sit with, and each time she saw that he liked her being abroad after dark, a great deal less than before. And once it was worse than a near miss. She came down one gray dawn to find him already in the still room ahead of her, turning her own jars over in his soft hands, and she had to stand in the doorway with her heart going like a hare, and remark in the flat voice of a woman thinking of nothing in particular, that the chamomile wanted replacing, until he wearied of frightening her and went. He was hunting in earnest now. He knew that somewhere in his tidy house a bottle was lying to him. He had simply not yet let himself believe that it was hers. One evening the Duke looked up from the fire and said, out of nothing, "I have been signing things for 2 years that I never once read. My hand is on the whole of it, and I could not tell you a figure. Why is that, do you think?" Her heart went very still. It was the nearest he had yet come to the thing folded under the darning wool. "Perhaps," she said carefully, "your Grace has been unwell longer than anyone told you. and perhaps you are getting better. If I were you, I think I should begin to read again." He looked at her across the low fire a long moment, and she thought he would ask her outright what she knew, and she was not ready, and neither in truth was he. The moment settled with the fire and passed, and neither of them knew, how could they, that a letter with her true name written plainly on the face of it was already 3 days south of Windhollow and coming steadily north, because a man she had never met had lately begun to wonder in his cold way exactly who the brown-haired woman warming his cousin's house really was. Asterisk. Corvin Vane came up the Windhollow Drive on the first genuinely warm day of the year, and the drive he came up was green. That was the thing that struck Eowyn afterward, when she had time to think of anything at all, that the ruin arrived on the loveliest morning of the spring, with the frost gone at last out of the ground and the first daffodils out along the honey-colored front of the house, and the north wing standing open to the mild air, with half the household drifting in and out of it as though it had never been anything but the warm heart of the place. The house had come back to life, and on the very morning it finished doing so, its 2 deaths came up the drive to collect. The Duke's cousin was a lean, elegant, cold-mannered man of 35, next in blood to the dukedom and next to nothing in fortune, his own father having gambled the family portion into the sea. He had been a frequent guest at Windhollow these 2 years, more frequent by far since Amabel died, and he had a very great interest, greater than anyone but Crail quite understood, in his cousin the Duke, remaining exactly as grief and Poppy had lately kept him, soft, incapable, and disinclined to marry again or father an heir. Corvin's small mountain of county debts had a way of settling themselves quietly. He had never asked how. He had been careful never to ask. It came to the same as Crail's phantom nurses in the end, money walking out of Windhollow through a door its master would not watch, and each of them had propped the other for 2 easy years. Corvin had come this warm morning because Crail had written to him in some alarm. The Duke was awake. The Duke was reading his own letters. The Duke had been seen to laugh and to walk his own east wing and to spend his evenings in the servants' end of the house in the company of a brown-haired companion nobody could account for. A woman who had appeared out of an ice storm, saved a doomed child over the physician's head, and then set herself with quiet method to prize every key in the house out of Crail's soft hand. Corvin, who was cleverer than Crail and a great deal colder, had not troubled to threaten her. He had simply made inquiries. He had a cousin married to an attorney in the West Country, and he had set that cousin to asking, in the mild way of country attorneys, whether anyone had heard of a young woman, a surgeon's daughter, a gentlewoman of about 22, who had left the household of Sir Marcus Fenwick rather suddenly the autumn before last. He had disliked her on sight, not for anything she had done to him, but for what she plainly was, a person who looked at things directly. Corvin Vane had built his whole comfortable ruin on no one at Windhollow ever looking directly at anything, not the Duke at his own accounts, not the county at the Duke, not a single soul at the smiling man who held every key. A woman who looked and wrote down what she saw, and could not be bought because she wanted nothing, was the one thing his easy arrangement could not survive, so he had wasted no threat on her as Crail had done. He had gone straight and quiet to the single weapon a hunted creature cannot turn aside, which is her own past. The answer had taken the winter to come. It came, as such answers do, in the very middle of everything else, for it arrived in Corvin Vane's coat pocket on the same bright morning that a second, heavier traveling carriage labored up the green drive behind his, and out of it, red and righteous and 58, climbed Sir Marcus Fenwick himself, who had traced his runaway the slow, patient way by a servant's letter home, and a word dropped in a coaching inn, and had come north in person to carry back the woman he meant to see hang for his mother's death. Eowyn was in the forecourt with a trug of cut daffodils on her arm when the 2 carriages stopped. She saw the second door open. She saw the fat, familiar hand on the frame, the plum-dark coat, the heavy face that had loomed over her, across a candle-lit deathbed, and named her a poisoner and a thief. The trug slipped from her arm. The daffodils went everywhere across the warming gravel. "There she is," said Sir Marcus Fenwick with enormous satisfaction. "There she stands, bold as brass, wearing some other honest woman's keys. Have you the least notion what you have put me to? You murdering, thieving girl, the miles, the months, the shame of it? Fetch your box. You are coming back to the assizes at Nethercombe to answer for my mother, and there is an end of the matter." And that was the exact moment, of all the moments in the world, that the Duke of Windhallow came down his own front steps. He had heard the carriages. He came out awake and clear-eyed, and lately enough returned to his own life to find a strange equipage in his forecourt, still faintly his own business. And he came down the steps into the middle of a scene that might have been arranged by some malicious fate. His cousin Corvin stood by the first carriage with a letter open in one gloved hand, and something like triumph cooling his elegant face. Dr. Crail had appeared soft-footed in the doorway behind him, smelling which way the wind had turned, and setting all his sails to it at once. A red stranger in plum bellowed murder at the brown-haired woman who had lately given the Duke back his own mind, and the woman herself stood white and still among a wreck of scattered yellow flowers, and did not run. "What?" said the Duke, in a voice Eloan had never heard him use, low and cold and carrying, the voice of the man he must have been before grief and Poppy took it from him. "Is the meaning of this in my forecourt, on my gravel?" Every window of the wakened house had filled. The maids were at the glass. Mrs. Quill stood in the kitchen doorway with Tobin's hand fast in hers. Alderton had come out onto the steps and gone very still. And at the head of the steps, leaning on her stick where two footmen had brought her because she had heard the wheels and would not be kept from them, stood the Dowager Duchess of Windhallow, 180, straight as a poker, watching the whole ruin of the forecourt with her unclouded eyes and saying, as yet, nothing at all. It came out all at once, and it came out badly, the way such things do. Sir Marcus was delighted to find a duke to appeal to, and laid the whole of it before him in his own black colors. His runaway ward, his late mother, a diamond drop gone from the old lady's own dressing table the very week she died, a suspicious last draft, and a size reward standing in print. His Grace, all unknowing, had been sheltering under his roof a fortune-hunting poisoner who had fled her betters in the night and hidden herself in honest service under a false name. And Corvin Vane, stepping smoothly forward with his letter, confirmed every word of it in his cool, cousinly voice. "It is quite true, Emeric. I grieve to say, I made the inquiries myself, for the household's protection, for your protection, and our grandmother's. She is precisely what this gentleman says. A surgeon's daughter, wanted at law, living here these 5 months under a name that is not her own. He let that settle, and then he set to hook, gently, exactly where it would sink deepest. One does rather ask oneself why a woman with the law at her heels would bury herself in the one house in England whose master could not count his own money, and set herself from the very first hour to learn where every shilling of it went, and to creep after dark into the physician's own accounts. A hunted woman does not do such things for love of good housekeeping, cousin. One wonders what else has been going missing, and into whose false-bottomed workbox." And Dr. Crail, who had spent 2 years learning precisely which way to lean, chose that moment to lean. "I had not liked to say it, your Grace," he murmured, all pink regret. "But since it is abroad, the young woman has taken an unaccountable interest in my medicine closet these months past. My accounts disturbed, my bottles handled after dark. I held my tongue, for who lays a charge against a companion your own grandmother favors? But a physician knows when his physic has been meddled with. And I confess I have wondered, this strange winter, at his Grace's long, low spirits, his weakness, his failing. I have wondered what has truly been going into his Grace's cup of a night, and by whose hand. He let the horror of it open in the warm air like a flower, and folded his soft hands, and looked at Eowyn with the patient sorrow of an honest man cruelly wronged. It was, some cold and distant part of her noted. Very well done indeed. He had taken the whole truth, and turned it inside out, and hung it round her neck, and every frightened face in the forecourt believed him. Every face in the bright forecourt turned to Eowyn. And she looked past all of them to the Duke, and saw him look at her, the way he had looked at her that first frozen evening, across 2 years of frost, closed, withdrawing, the awful new warmth going out of his face like a door swinging shut. She watched him wonder if she had lied to him. The one person in 2 years who had looked at him without fear. A woman with a hidden name, a hidden crime, a hidden reason for counting his money in the dark exactly as his cousin said. And Eowyn Vesey standing among the fallen daffodils with the whole county's ruin turned upon her, discovered the strangest thing of her life. The dread was gone. For 2 years she had lain awake building this exact morning in the dark, the hand on her shoulder, the names spoken aloud, the faces turning one by one, and had feared it the way one fears dying. Now that she stood in the very middle of it, with a duke's cousin calling her a thief and a duke's physician arranging to call her something far worse, she found that the thing she had run from all her life had no more power over her than a storm already spent. They had taken it all, her hiding place, her false name, her safety, her good character, everything she had crossed a county to keep. There was nothing left in her small enough to frighten. And a person with nothing left to protect, she understood in that bright, ringing quiet, is the freest and most dangerous creature in any forecourt. There was only the truth left now, and the truth, at least, was simple. "Every word this gentleman has said of me," she said, and her voice carried clear and level across the gravel, so that the maids at the windows heard it, and the grooms in the arch heard it, and the Duke of Windhollow 10 feet away heard it best of all, "is true. I am Eowyn Vesey," she said into the ringing silence. "My father was a surgeon apothecary, and the best I have ever known. And when he died, I went into Sir Marcus's house to nurse his mother, because a woman must eat. The old lady died in the spring. Old ladies do. She died of a stopped heart at 70, and her own physician knew it and would have said so, until a diamond drop went missing the same week, and it became a great deal more convenient to a family with debts of its own to blame the surgeon's daughter than to ask which member of the household had truly emptied the jewel case. I did not poison Lady Fenwick. I did not take her diamond, but I had no people and no fortune and no friend to swear for me, and I have learned what happens to such women when a rich family wants a thief. So I ran. I took a false name, and I came here, and I meant to stay small and silent and safe for 3 years until the danger was spent." She looked not at Sir Marcus, but at the Duke. "That much your cousin has exactly right. I hid. I counted your money in the dark. I crept into your physician's accounts. I have a false-bottomed workbox, and there is a case built in it, fair copied in my own hand, 3 months' work of it." She turned back to the forecourt at large, and she stopped being invisible on purpose, for the first time in her careful life. "But your cousin has the why of it wrong, Dr. Crail, and I think you may tell him so yourself, for you know it better than any man here." She did not raise her voice. "I counted the money, because within a fortnight of coming to this house, I found the same ounce of opium billed to the estate at 5 times what the apothecary at Nethercombe sells it for at his own counter, and he will swear to his price, for I have it in his own hand. I crept into your accounts because I found a monthly nurse charged at £1 a week for the late Duchess's lying in 8 weeks of her, when Mrs. Quill will tell you, and to set her mark to it, that no nurse ever crossed that threshold. I found tortoiseshell instruments bought and never delivered, and French cordials paid for and never poured. And I found," she said, and now at last her voice did change, and every soul in the court leaned into it, "the master's own nightly cordial mixed at treble strength with poppy, week upon week, dose upon careful dose, only exactly enough to keep him soft and slow, and asleep on his feet, and signing whatever was slid beneath his hand. For 2 years. This is a hysterics tale, said Dr. Crail, but the smile had gone strange on his face. A wanted woman's slander. Where is your treble, Poppy? His Grace's cordial stands in my closet where it always has. His Grace's cordial has had no poppy in it at all these 5 weeks, said Elowen, because I have been mixing it myself and pouring yours down the stillroom drain. And there, Dr. Crail is my proof, and you built it for me. Look at him. And the whole forecourt looked at the Duke of Windhollow, who stood on his own gravel, clear-eyed and upright and terribly awake, a man who not 6 weeks past could not follow a hand of cards or remember the hour, and who was now looking at his smiling physician with an expression that answered every question anyone in that court had thought to ask. Crail's mouth opened and shut and made no sound. A man does not argue with a cure standing 8 feet tall in front of him. And one by one, in the warm forecourt, the house that had been too frightened to speak found its tongue. Quill said plainly and to the whole company that no monthly nurse had ever come to her lady's lying in, and that she would swear it before any bench in England. Alderton said in his flat old servant's voice that he had carried the master's cordial up every night for 2 years, and had lately carried up Miss Rill's honest bottle instead, and he named the very night the change began. Tamsin was already running for the sealed brown book. A groom was already saddling to fetch the apothecary from Nethercombe with his prices chalked on his own board. The proof did not fall like thunder. It gathered, quiet voice laid upon quiet voice, exactly as her figures had gathered all through the spring, and a quiet thing, once it stands complete, is the one kind of accusation that cannot be laughed away. It was the Duke who broke the silence. He came down the last of his own steps, and he did not go to Sir Marcus, and he did not go to his cousin. He went to Elowen, and he stood before her among the fallen daffodils, and when he spoke, his voice had gone all the way down, past cold, to the bone. For 5 weeks, he said, I have wondered why I was climbing up out of my own grave, and I told myself it was the spring. He looked at her. It was you. Every hour of it was you. For a moment he could not go on. 2 years stood between the man he had been the morning his wife first took ill and the man standing awake on this gravel now, and he was seeing, all at once, the whole of what had been done to him in the dark of them, and the whole of what had been done before ever it was done to him, to her. Then he turned, and the awful awake fury in his face was not for Elowen at all. Alderton, Dr. Crail is not to leave this house until the Nethercombe magistrate has been sent for. Every bottle in that closet is to be sealed. Every account he has kept for 2 years goes to the bench with him, and this lady's fair copies beside them. And if there is a shilling of my household's money, or a grain of what he did to, his voice caught once on the unsaid name and steadied, to my wife, he will answer for the whole of it, as the law answers such men. Crail went to the magistrate that afternoon, and there was in the end nothing else in the world for him to do. At the forecourt's edge he turned once, all the pink softness gone out of him, and looked at Elowen with a hatred that had no smile left anywhere in it. You should have kept to your chamomile, Miss Rill, he said. No, Elowen agreed. I never had the trick of it. Good day, Dr. Crail. And Sir Marcus Fenwick, who had come north to see a girl hang and found himself instead standing in the forecourt of a duke who was now looking at him with cold and lucid attention, discovered that his mother's stopped heart and his family's missing diamond would bear rather more looking into than he had ever meant to invite, and that a duke's man of business, once roused, can ask questions in the West Country that a friendless surgeon's daughter never could. Asterisk, 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 that left the cousin. Corvin Vane had stood very still through the whole long reckoning, the letter crushed slowly to nothing in his gloved hand, watching the comfortable machine that had kept him solvent for 2 years come apart plank by plank on the warm morning air. When Crail had been led away, he did not run, and he did not bluster. He made, being a gambler to the bone, one last cool throw. You will want me gone too, I imagine, he said to the Duke. Your devoted cousin, whose debts your steward found so easy to settle. Oh, I knew. Of course I knew where the money came from. Do you suppose a man as poor as I am does not know to the shilling who is paying for his coat? His voice was bright and brittle as struck ice. Turn me out, then. I have 400 a year, and the wrong name for it, and I have spent 15 years being poor among people who were once my equals, and watching a fortune I am next in blood to keep a man alive who does nothing with it but grieve. You have never once in your life not known where you would sleep. Emmerich, do not look at me as though I were a monster. I am only tired and afraid, and I have been both for a very long time. The Duke's face had gone hard as the frost cord in winter. Alone saw him draw the breath that would be just, and knew that justice here would be the ruin of Corvin Vane, turned out disgraced. 400 a year, and a closed door in the whole county to talk of it, your grace, she said. May I? He looked at her, he let the breath go, he inclined his head. She went and stood in front of the elegant, frightened, hateful man who had spent the winter trying to put a rope around her neck. She did not gloat. She had learned long ago that gloating is the one thing your tormentor is braced for, and she had never once in her life given a tormentor what he expected. You let Crail settle your debts out of this house, she said quietly. That is theft, and you know that it is, and so does his grace. But you did not treble the poppy in your cousin's cup. You did not carry the wrong physic up to a dying woman 2 Aprils ago. That was Crail's hand, not yours. And when this gentleman spoke of murder in the forecourt just now, I watched your face and you had not known it. You watched, and you profited, and you held your tongue, which is the very sin I committed under this roof myself until an hour ago. So I am poorly placed to hang you for it. She held the bright, terrified eyes. There is a small house at the park's edge standing empty. It is sound, and it is dull, and a man might live in it quietly on 400 a year and be neither served nor scorned and stop being so very tired. If his grace is willing, you would owe it to no one, least of all to me. I should like that understood. Corvin Vane stared at her as though she had struck him, which in a way she had. Whatever he had braced himself to meet, it was not this, and it undid him where justice would only have hardened him. Why, he said, it was not a graceful question. It was torn out of him. Because I know exactly how tiring it is, said Alawan. And because a house that has just this morning thrown out one thief should not keep the day by making a beggar of another. Good afternoon, Mr. Vane. The spring turned into summer, and Windhollow came the rest of the way back to life. The estate accounts were kept in a single honest book now, in Elowan's own clear hand, and no second book, bound in brown calf, kept a different and dishonest reckoning in a locked closet down the passage. What Crail had squeezed out of the house over 2 years was reckoned to the last shilling, and where he could not restore it, the Duke restored it out of his own pocket and counted it cheaply bought. Ward went to the West Country, and a Duke's questions carried where a surgeon's daughters never had. It came out, in time that Sir Marcus's own son had pawned his grandmother's diamond to cover a gaming debt and let a friendless nurse take the blame for the whole of it. The reward notice was withdrawn. The name Elowan Vasey was made clean again, and she found she could wear it in daylight for the first time since the night she fled Fenwick End. And by high summer there was no one left at Windhollow to call the North Wing anything but what it plainly was. The frost was 2 years gone off its windows, its chimney drew sweet, its fire never went out. The maids brought their mending there, and Thorne warmed his hands there, and Mrs. Quill's grandson, Tobin, 6 years old and loud as a bell and entirely unaware that he had ever been meant to die in a stable court, learned his letters on the settle by its hearth. Amabel's own still-room labels, in her round, girlish hand, were kept in a drawer in the new mistress's keeping and not thrown away, and the truth of how she had died was known at last and grieved in the open, which is the only place grief is any use. The Duke had the far, cold end of his own great house become exactly as his wife had once said. A real house must, the warmest and best-loved room in it, the one place in all of Wind Hollow that everyone, given the choice, wished to be. He asked Elowen to marry him in that wing, on a warm evening at the end of that first summer, and he asked it in a way she had not expected. "I have spent 2 years signing what was put before me without reading it," he said, "and I do not mean to do it ever again, least of all to you. So I will put nothing in front of you to sign. Your name is your own now, and clean, and you have no fortune and want none, and in a very little while you could leave this house and never need any man's roof to shelter under. You have no need of me, Elowen, and that in the end is the whole reason I dare to ask, not because the house wants a mistress, it has had one since the day it thawed, because I should like to spend whatever is left of my life being looked at by the one person who was never from that first frozen hour the least afraid of me. Marry me because you choose it, or refuse me and stay and keep the warm house. I could not keep myself, and I will never once press you on it again. From here on, every word is yours. 200 years of good sense in the house's bones, and the fire low, and the wind gone soft and warm outside." Elowen looked up at him. Pshh! She thought of the iron road, and the blue-lipped boy, and the horn spoon, and the 3 long years she had meant to spend invisible and safe. Safe was a small word. She had been safe her whole life. She had never once, until this cold house, been seen to Merrick, she said. She had never used his name. The wing heard her use it. He heard her use it. And something crossed his face that was worth more than any fortune Sir Marcus Fenwick had ever accused her of hiding. "Yes, I will marry you, choosing it." The ghost of the almost smile was on her own mouth now. "On one condition, your grace, name it. The chimney in the west attic smokes, and 3 of your maids sleep under it. It is mended before the first frost properly, by the man who is actually paid to mend it." The Duke of Wind Hollow laughed. It was not a sound the county had heard in 2 years, and it carried the length of the warm, bright wing, and out through the open windows into the summer dark where the whole living house could hear it. By the door, the Dowager Duchess who had, she would allow, wept exactly once at the wedding, and declared that a single tear was the whole allowance any sensible woman ought ever to spend on being happy, set down her glass and looked for one moment entirely satisfied. She had come to Wind Hollow meaning to vanish into its coldest and deadest corner, and had become instead the one woman the whole county could not stop speaking of, keeping warm the room the entire house had learned to love. And she had found, to her own great astonishment, the thing that all her careful years of hiding had never taught her, and one cold winter had, that to be truly seen by the right person is not the danger she had run from all her life. It is the nearest thing to a hearth that a person is ever given.